My name is Victoria Ashford, and for 15 years I perfected the art of being invisible. Not physically invisible, of course. In our social circle, a woman like me was always visible, always on display, like a prized painting in a gallery that people admired but never really saw. I was 38 years old, married to Marcus Ashford, one of New York's most prominent real estate developers, and according to everyone who knew us, I had won the lottery. The Ashford name opened doors that money alone couldn't. Marcus's family had built their fortune 3 generations ago in Manhattan real estate, back when the city was still finding its shape. By the time Marcus inherited control of Ashford Properties at age 32, the company was worth $800 million. By age 45, he'd tripled that valuation through aggressive expansion into commercial properties across the East Coast. I met Marcus at a charity auction in 2009, right after the financial crisis had left everyone in the city anxious and desperate to appear unaffected. I was 23, fresh out of Columbia Business School with an MBA I'd earned on scholarship, working as a junior analyst at a mid-tier investment firm. Marcus was 30, already running Ashford Properties, and he moved through the charity event like he owned not just buildings, but the very air people breathed. He noticed me because I was the only person at our table who didn't laugh at his jokes. Looking back, I think my indifference intrigued him. In his world, everyone performed for him. Everyone wanted something. I was just there because my boss had bought a table and needed warm bodies to fill the seats. We dated for 8 months before he proposed on a yacht anchored off the Hamptons, surrounded by 50 of his closest friends and family members who applauded like they'd known all along this was coming. The ring was a flawless 6-carat diamond that probably cost more than my parents had earned in their entire lives. I said yes because I loved him, or at least I loved who I thought he was. Our wedding was featured in Town and Country magazine. 400 guests, ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral, reception at the Plaza. My parents flew in from Cleveland, overwhelmed and out of place among Manhattan's elite. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, though I couldn't tell if it was from joy or fear that I was entering a world where she couldn't follow. The first few years were good. Marcus traveled constantly for business, and when he was home, he was attentive in that distracted way successful men are, present, but always with half his mind on the next deal. I didn't mind initially. I'd grown up watching my father work 3 jobs to keep our family afloat. Hard work was something I understood and respected. What I didn't understand yet was the difference between building something and simply spending what others had built for you. By our 3rd anniversary, I'd stopped working. Marcus insisted it wasn't necessary, that his wife didn't need to work, that it looked better if I focused on supporting his career and managing our social obligations. I spent my days attending charity luncheons, planning dinner parties, serving on the boards of organizations where my last name mattered more than my opinions. I became exactly what Marcus needed me to be, a beautiful, accomplished wife who made him look good, who knew which fork to use at every dinner, who could make small talk with billionaires and politicians without ever saying anything memorable or controversial. But here's what Marcus never knew, what nobody knew. 3 months after we married, I started investing. Small amounts at first, money I'd saved before the wedding, bonuses from my old job that I'd never touched. I opened accounts under my maiden name, Victoria Chen, using my mother's address in Cleveland for the statements. I studied companies the way other society wives studied fashion. I read annual reports like novels, analyzed market trends while Marcus slept beside me, spent hours researching emerging technologies in international markets. My MBA hadn't been for decoration, even if Marcus treated it like it was. By our 5th anniversary, my investment portfolio was worth $2 million. By year 7, it had grown to $8 million. I discovered I had an instinct for identifying companies on the verge of breakthrough moments. Startups that were undervalued because they were too innovative for traditional investors to understand. I found a tech company developing AI infrastructure before anyone was talking about artificial intelligence. I invested in a biotech firm working on mRNA technology years before the pandemic made them household names. Every dollar I made, I reinvested. And I did it all in complete silence. Marcus would come home from his office, complaining about difficult negotiations or problematic contractors, and I would listen sympathetically while mentally calculating my own portfolio's growth. He'd talk about his billion-dollar deals while I was quietly building my own empire in the shadows. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman he dismissed as someone who didn't understand business was outperforming his entire company's returns, percentage-wise, year after year. By our 10th anniversary, I wasn't just investing anymore. I was creating. I'd used shell companies and offshore accounts to begin acquiring stakes in tech startups, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements, always operating through layers of legal entities that obscured my involvement. I became known in certain investor circles as the Ghost, an anonymous venture capitalist who had an almost supernatural ability to identify winners. Portfolio companies I touched seemed to turn to gold. Founders who received funding from my entities knew they were dealing with someone serious, but they never knew it was me, the society wife who showed up at their product launches wearing Chanel and making polite conversation about user interface design. The money became almost absurd after a while. By year 12, my net worth was somewhere north of $400 million. I'd helped launch 9 different companies that had either gone public or been acquired at valuations that made headlines. I sat on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies under assumed identities, participating in video conferences from hotel rooms while Marcus thought I was shopping or at the spa. I owned property in 7 different countries, none of it in my married name. I'd built an empire that dwarfed Marcus's family legacy, and he had absolutely no idea. You might wonder why I stayed silent, why I didn't tell my husband about my success, share my achievements, claim the recognition I'd earned. The truth is complicated. Partly, I enjoyed the secret. There was power in knowing something he didn't, in being underestimated so completely. But mostly, I stayed quiet, because I'd learned early in our marriage that Marcus's ego couldn't handle being anything less than the most successful person in the room. The few times I'd ventured opinions about his business deals, offering insights from my own research, he'd dismissed me with the kind of patronizing smile you'd give a child trying to explain quantum physics. "Victoria, sweetheart, this is complicated stuff. Why don't you focus on the foundation gala? You're so good at that." So I let him believe I was just the pretty wife, the supportive spouse, the woman whose greatest talent was looking good in a gown and remembering donors' names. I attended his company events and smiled while he introduced me to investors, never mentioning that several of those investors had made fortunes following my anonymous recommendations. I sat through dinners where Marcus and his colleagues discussed deals, never revealing that I'd often analyzed the same opportunities and passed on them as overvalued. Everything changed on a Thursday night in September, 15 years into our marriage. Marcus had invited 12 of his most important business associates to a dinner at Perse, the exclusive restaurant overlooking Central Park. These weren't friends. They were the kind of contacts that mattered in Manhattan, people who controlled billions in capital, who could make or break deals with a phone call. I wore a navy Valentino gown that had cost $18,000, jewelry worth more than most people's houses, and I smiled my practice smile as we gathered in the private dining room. The dinner started like dozens of others I'd attended. The men talked business while their wives discussed recent vacations and upcoming charity events. I was seated between Gerald Hutchinson, CEO of one of the largest private equity firms in the country, and Thomas Chen, no relation, who ran a family office managing $3 billion. The wine flowed freely, loosening tongues and inflating egos. Around the third course, Marcus stood to make a toast. He was slightly drunk, his face flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. He raised his glass, and the table fell silent. "To my beautiful wife Victoria," he began, and I smiled graciously, expecting the usual platitudes about my support and patience. She's been by my side for 15 years now, decorating my life, making everything look perfect. The table laughed politely. I felt something cold forming in my stomach. "You know what I love most about Victoria?" Marcus continued, his words starting to slur slightly. "She's never once tried to understand what I do. She doesn't ask complicated questions or pretend to have opinions about business. She knows her place, and she stays there." My smile didn't falter, but my grip on the wine glass tightened. "Some women," Marcus gestured vaguely with his glass, "think that because they have an MBA or read the Wall Street Journal, they understand the world men like us operate in. But Victoria has always understood the truth." He paused dramatically. "She's smart enough to know she'll never reach my status, and she doesn't try. That's why our marriage works." The table went quiet. Some of the wives looked uncomfortable. A few of the men smiled uneasily, unsure if Marcus was joking or making a point. Gerald Hutchinson cleared his throat. "Marcus, Maybe we should sit down and finish dinner. Marcus waved him off. No, I want everyone to understand this. Victoria decorates my life beautifully, just like she decorated this dinner tonight. She chose the flowers. She coordinated everything. But building, creating value, understanding high-stakes negotiations? He shook his head with exaggerated sadness. Sweetheart, you'll never reach that level. And that's okay. We all have our roles. I looked at my husband, really looked at him. Perhaps for the first time in years, I saw a man drunk on wine and his own delusions. A man who had inherited wealth and position and believed he'd earned them. A man who was so caught up in his own legend that he'd never noticed his wife had surpassed him in every meaningful way. And in that moment, something crystallized in my mind. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more final than anger. A decision. I set down my wine glass with deliberate precision. The sound of crystal touching linen drew everyone's attention. My voice when I spoke was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. Marcus, darling, I said. That was quite the speech. He beamed at me, mistaking my composure for agreement. I'm glad you understand, sweetheart. You're perfect, exactly as you are. I stood slowly, smoothing my gown. The table watched with the kind of fascinated horror people show when they sense something important is happening, but don't yet understand what. I do understand, I continued. I understand that you've spent 15 years so focused on your own reflected glory that you never once wondered how your wife spent her days. Marcus's smile started to fade. What are you talking about? I picked up my clutch, checked my reflection in the window overlooking Central Park. The woman looking back at me was done hiding. I'm talking about the fact that while you were giving this touching speech about my limitations, I was actually calculating something interesting. Marcus looked confused. The men at the table shifted uncomfortably. Their wives had gone completely still. I was calculating, I continued conversationally, that my personal net worth is approximately 3 times what Ashford Properties is currently valued at. And unlike your company, which is leveraged to the point of recklessness, my assets are unencumbered and growing at a rate that would make your financial team weep. The silence that followed was absolute. You see, I went on, while you were busy thinking I was shopping and planning charity events, I was actually building something real. I've been investing for 14 years now. Started small, but I seem to have a talent for it. That AI company you passed on in 2015, calling it a waste of money? I bought a 12% stake. It's now worth $140 million. The biotech firm you laughed about last year? I was their Series A lead investor. Their market cap hit $3 billion last month. Marcus's face had gone from flushed to pale. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Gerald Hutchinson was staring at me with sudden intensity. Thomas Chen had pulled out his phone, already searching for something. I spent 15 years letting you believe I was decorative, I said, because it was easier than dealing with your ego. But tonight, you've made something very clear. I'll never reach your status. Marcus found his voice, though it came out as a croak. This is a joke. Victoria, what are you talking about? I reached into my clutch and pulled out a business card. Plain white stock, simple black text. I handed it to Gerald Hutchinson, not Marcus. Mr. Hutchinson, you've been trying to schedule a meeting with the ghost for 3 years now. Hutchinson looked at the card, then up at me, his expression transforming from confusion to shock, to something like awe. You're the ghost? The table erupted. Thomas Chen's phone had apparently confirmed something because he was staring at me like I'd revealed myself to be a mythical creature. The women were looking between me and Marcus with dawning realization. Marcus grabbed my wrist. Stop this right now. You're making a fool of yourself. I pulled away easily. I'm making a fool of myself? I've personally funded 17 startup companies that have returned over $800 million in combined profits. I'm on the board of 3 companies in your portfolio, Marcus, voting on decisions that affect your returns. Last year, when Ashford Properties nearly defaulted on that downtown development project, the anonymous investor who bought your debt and restructured it on favorable terms, that was me. I saved your company. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. And not because I needed to prove anything. I did it because I still cared about you, Marcus. Past tense. But then you stood up tonight and told a room full of people that I'll never reach your level. The thing is, darling, I reached your level 10 years ago. Then I lapped you. Twice. I pulled my wedding ring off, set it on the table beside Marcus's plate. The 15-carat diamond caught the light, throwing rainbows across his shocked face. "I'll have my attorney contact you tomorrow about the divorce proceedings. Don't worry about money, Marcus. I'm sure you'll be fine. Your family fortune should last you quite a while if you're careful." Marcus had found his voice again, and it came out as a roar. "This is insane. You can't just leave. You're my wife." "Was your wife," I corrected. "Now I'm just the woman whose limitations you misjudged." I turned to address the rest of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for a memorable evening. I'm sure we'll see each other at various board meetings. Gerald, Thomas, my assistant will be in touch about those meetings you requested." And with that, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind 15 years of silence, a marriage that had been over for longer than I'd admitted, and a husband whose ego had finally written a check his actual abilities couldn't cash. The September air was cool against my skin as I stepped onto the sidewalk. My phone was already buzzing with messages. I ignored them all except one, from my attorney, a woman named Patricia Reeves who'd been quietly managing my various entities for years. She must have been copied on something because her message was succinct. "Well, that's one way to come out. Meet me at the office. We have work to do." I smiled to myself, feeling lighter than I had in years. Marcus was right about one thing. I'd never reach his status, because I'd already gone so far beyond it that we weren't even playing the same game anymore. A black car pulled up. My driver, Robert, who'd been waiting nearby. He opened the door without comment. Robert had been driving me to secret business meetings for 5 years. He'd kept every confidence, never asked questions. "Ma'am," he said simply. I slid into the back seat, checking my reflection one last time in the car window. The woman looking back wasn't the decorative wife anymore. She was Victoria Chen Ashford, and she was done pretending to be anything less than extraordinary. As we pulled away from the restaurant, I could see through the window that chaos had erupted at our table. Marcus was on his feet, gesturing wildly. Hutchinson and Chen were deep in conversation, phones out. The wives were clustered together, probably trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Tomorrow, the story would spread through Manhattan's social circles like wildfire. By next week, it would hit the business press. Within a month, the full extent of my activities would be common knowledge. The ghost would have a face, and that face would belong to a woman who'd been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. But tonight, I had something more important to do. I had to figure out who I wanted to be now that I'd stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't. The city lights streamed past the car window. New York had always been a place where people reinvented themselves, where fortunes were made and lost, where the impossible became routine. I'd just done what so many before me had done. I'd shed an old identity and claimed a new one. The only difference was, my new identity wasn't actually new at all. It had been there the whole time, growing in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And Marcus, poor Marcus, had given me that moment with his arrogant speech about status and place and roles. He'd handed me the perfect exit line, and I'd taken it. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. It was a text from Thomas Chen. "Victoria, I've been trying to meet the ghost for 2 years. Had no idea I was having dinner with you all this time. Can we talk?" I typed back, "Have your people call my people. We'll set something up." His response was almost instant. "Looking forward to it. Also, that exit was legendary. You just became the most talked about woman in New York." I smiled and put the phone away. Let them talk. I'd been invisible for long enough. It was time to be seen. The penthouse apartment I'd bought 3 years ago under a shell company name occupied the top 2 floors of a building in Tribeca. Marcus didn't know about it. As far as he was concerned, I spent my days at our Upper East Side mansion, the 16-room monument to old money that his grandmother had left him. The Tribeca place was mine. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view that stretched from the Freedom Tower to the Chrysler Building. No servants, no family history, no expectations. Just space to think and work, without the weight of the Ashford name pressing down on me. Robert pulled up to the private entrance at 11 p.m. The building's night doorman nodded a greeting, but didn't speak. I'd paid significant money to ensure my privacy here. The staff knew me as Victoria Chen, successful investor, nothing more. The elevator required a keycard and fingerprint scan. I'd installed security that would make a paranoid dictator proud. My elevator opened directly into the apartment's foyer. I slipped off my heels, feeling the cool marble under my feet, and headed straight to what Marcus would have called my war room. The space took up half of the second floor. 8 monitors arranged across a custom desk, each one feeding real-time data from markets around the world. Tokyo was already open, showing promising movement in some semiconductor stocks I'd been tracking. London would open in a few hours. New York would wake to chaos. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I had calls to make. Patricia answered on the first ring. She never slept, or at least I'd never caught her sleeping. Her law firm, Reeves & Associates, specialized in what she called complex privacy arrangements, which meant helping very wealthy people stay very hidden. "Well," she said without preamble, "you certainly made an entrance." "More like an exit," I replied, pulling up files on my main monitor. "How bad is it going to be?" Patricia laughed. "Bad for Marcus. Interesting for you. I've already had 3 calls from reporters who somehow heard about an incident at Per Se tonight. The story's spreading fast. I need you to start divorce proceedings first thing tomorrow morning. File before he has time to think. I want this clean and quick. You'll want a forensic accountant going through everything. He's going to come at this hard once the shock wears off." "Let him," I said. "Every asset I've built is completely separate from the marriage. He has no claim to any of it." I made sure of that. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Victoria, I have to ask, why now? Why let him find out this way?" "Because I got tired," I said honestly. "Tired of pretending. Tired of being invisible. Tired of watching him preen about his accomplishments while dismissing mine. Tonight, he gave me permission to stop pretending. He said I'd never reach his status, so I corrected him." She laughed again. "Well, consider him corrected. I'll file papers tomorrow. Expect this to get messy. Marcus won't take this lying down." "I'm counting on it," I said. "Let him fight. It'll make for better headlines." After we hung up, I stood at the window looking out over the city. Somewhere across town, Marcus was probably still trying to explain what had happened to his dinner guests. Or maybe he'd retreated to his club, surrounding himself with other rich men who would tell him what he wanted to hear, that his wife had lost her mind, that she was bluffing, that this would all blow over. He had no idea what was coming. I pulled up my portfolio on the main screen. $437 million in liquid assets. Another $300 million in property and equity stakes. Income streams from 12 different sources. And growth projections that suggested I'd cross the $1 billion mark within 18 months. All of it built in silence while my husband dismissed me as decorative. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Taking chances felt right tonight. "Victoria Ashford?" a woman's voice asked. "Or should I say Victoria Chen? Or perhaps I should just call you the ghost." "This is Victoria," I said carefully. "Who's calling?" "My name is Catherine Wells. I'm a journalist with Forbes. I write about women in business, particularly women who've broken through in male-dominated industries. I heard something very interesting happened at Per Se tonight. I'm sure you've heard many things," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What I heard," Catherine continued, "was that Marcus Ashford's wife revealed she's been secretly building a tech empire while letting everyone believe she was just another society wife. I heard she's actually the ghost, the anonymous investor every startup founder wants backing from. I heard she walked out on her marriage in the middle of dinner after her husband publicly humiliated her. Any of that sound accurate?" "All of it sounds accurate," I said. "Are you interested in telling your side? Because I think there's a hell of a story here. A story about underestimation, hidden talent, and what happens when a woman decides to stop playing small." I was interested, but not tonight. Tonight I was still processing what I'd done, what it meant, where it would lead. "Give me a week," I told Catherine. "Let the initial chaos settle, then we'll talk. I want to tell the full story, not just react to tonight's drama." She agreed immediately. 1 week. "I'll send you my personal cell number. When you're ready to talk, call me. We'll do this right." After the call ended, I poured myself 2 fingers of a scotch that cost more per bottle than Marcus thought I spent in a month on personal expenses, and sat in front of my monitors watching numbers scroll past. The Asian markets were active. One of my tech companies was announcing earnings tomorrow. The algorithms I'd developed to identify investment opportunities were flagging 3 new prospects worth investigating. The work never stopped, and I'd never wanted it to. This was who I was under all the decorative camouflage. Someone who understood value, who could see potential where others saw risk, who had the courage to bet on innovation, even when conventional wisdom said to play it safe. Marcus had been wrong about so many things, but he'd been most wrong about this. He thought I'd spent 15 years as an accessory to his life. The truth was far more interesting. I'd spent 15 years building my own life while he was too self-obsessed to notice. My laptop pinged with an email. The subject line made me smile. From Gerald Hutchinson to The Ghost. The email was brief. Ms. Ashford Chen, I've spent 3 years trying to reach you through various intermediaries. Never occurred to me you were sitting across the dinner table from me at least a dozen times. I'd like to apologize for my silence tonight. I was too shocked to react appropriately to what was clearly an intolerable situation. I'm emailing to request a meeting at your earliest convenience. My firm is interested in discussing a potential partnership. Also, for what it's worth, that exit was the most impressive power move I've seen in 40 years of doing business in New York. Best regards, Gerald. I replied simply, my assistant will be in touch next week to schedule something. And thank you. I closed the laptop and walked back to the windows. The city sprawled below me, millions of lights representing millions of people, each with their own ambitions and secrets and dreams. For 15 years, I'd been one of those secret dreamers, building something extraordinary in the shadows. Now, whether I'd chosen it or Marcus had forced my hand, I was stepping into the light. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Patricia would file divorce papers. The press would start investigating my companies and investments. Marcus would mount some kind of defense or counterattack. His ego wouldn't allow him to simply accept what had happened. There would be meetings and negotiations, interviews and scrutiny. My carefully constructed privacy would evaporate. Everyone would want to know how I'd done it, why I'd hidden it, what came next. But tonight, I had this moment of perfect clarity. Standing in my secret apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my success, knowing I'd finally stopped pretending to be less than I was. It felt like freedom. The clock showed 2 a.m. I should sleep, but I was too energized. Instead, I pulled up my investment analysis and started reviewing potential opportunities. A biotech company in San Diego working on personalized medicine. A fintech startup in Austin, reimagining small business lending. An agricultural technology firm in Kenya developing drought-resistant crops. Each one represented not just potential returns, but the possibility of building something meaningful. That's what Marcus had never understood. For him, business was about ego, status, proving his worth through the size of his deals and the deference of his peers. For me, it was about creating value, identifying innovations that could change lives, betting on the future. The money was just a way of keeping score. I made notes, flagged companies for deeper research, sent queries to analysts I trusted. The work absorbed me completely, just as it always had. This was my meditation, my passion, my purpose, and I'd never have to hide it again. The sky was starting to lighten over Brooklyn when I finally shut down the monitors and headed to bed. Tomorrow, or rather today, would bring its own challenges. But I'd face them as myself, fully visible, unapologetically capable, done with decorating someone else's life. Marcus had said I'd never reach his status. He was right, but not because I wasn't capable, because I'd already built something bigger than status, bigger than ego, bigger than his limited imagination could comprehend. And now, the whole world was about to see exactly what Victoria Ashford was capable of when she stopped hiding. I woke at 7 a.m., to my phone vibrating with enough intensity to walk itself off the nightstand. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, a dozen voicemails. The story was spreading faster than I'd anticipated. I ignored most of it and checked the one source that mattered. Patricia had emailed at 6:30 a.m., papers filed at courthouse opening. Served him at the mansion at 6:45. He's called my office 6 times already. Denial is strong with this one. Call me when you're up. The second email was from my personal assistant, Jennifer, a woman I'd hired 3 years ago who knew everything about my real business and nothing about my marriage. She'd been operating out of an office in the financial district, managing my calendar, coordinating with portfolio companies, fielding meeting requests, all while Marcus thought I spent my days having lunch with other wealthy wives. Boss, her email began, whatever happened last night broke the internet. At least, the business internet. I have 47 meeting requests from VCs, private equity firms, and family offices. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, and Forbes are all calling for comment. And someone from your building on the Upper East Side called to say Mr. Ashford is locked out? Should I handle that? I smiled and replied, "Let the building staff deal with Marcus. Accept the Forbes interview with Catherine Wells. Decline everything else for now. Start vetting the meeting requests. Prioritize anyone with actual capital to deploy and interesting portfolio companies." I showered, dressed in what I thought of as my real clothes, Armani pantsuit, silk blouse, comfortable heels, then checked the New York Times website. Nothing yet, but it was early. The business blogs were another story. Dealbook had picked it up. Society wife revealed as secret tech investor in dramatic restaurant confrontation. The story was light on specifics, but heavy on speculation. I made coffee and started going through the messages systematically. My parents had called, confused and worried. I texted them back promising to call later. Marcus's sister had sent a vitriolic message calling me various creative names. I deleted it without response. Thomas Chen had emailed with a simple message: "You're a legend. Let's have lunch." My lawyer beeped through while I was sorting through investor queries. "Victoria," Patricia said without greeting, "Marcus wants to talk. He's currently in my reception area, refusing to leave until I get you on the phone." "Tell him to go home," I said. "There's nothing to discuss. The divorce papers are clear. He gets Ashford properties and everything he brought into the marriage. I keep everything I built. It's about as fair as these things get. He's claiming none of this is real," Patricia continued. "He says you're having some kind of breakdown, that the business claims are delusions. He wants you to agree to a psychiatric evaluation." I laughed. Of course he does, because in Marcus's world, the only explanation for his wife outperforming him is mental illness. Tell him my psychiatric health is sound and documented. Tell him if he wants to contest anything, he can do it through discovery, where he'll learn exactly how real my businesses are. And Patricia, make sure he understands that if he goes the mental health route, I'll have no choice but to release detailed financial records showing that I personally saved his company from bankruptcy last year. That should give him pause. She promised to deliver the message and hung up. I sat at my desk and pulled up news feeds, watching the story morph and grow. Someone had leaked details from the dinner. Now articles were mentioning specific amounts, naming my portfolio companies, speculating about my net worth. I was being called everything from a genius to a con artist, to a feminist icon, to a manipulative spouse. The truth was somewhere in all of it and none of it. By noon, my Tribeca building had 3 news vans camped outside. The doorman called to warn me, suggesting I use the basement exit if I needed to leave. I thanked him and decided to stay put. I had everything I needed here, and going outside meant answering questions I wasn't ready to address yet. Around 2 p.m., something unexpected happened. My email pinged with a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simple: "From another ghost." I opened it cautiously. "Dear Victoria," the message began. "My name is Rebecca Morrison. You don't know me, but I know you. Or rather, I know your strategy. For 8 years, I built a boutique investment firm while my husband believed I was spending his money on personal trainers and spa days. When I divorced him 2 years ago and revealed my actual net worth, it nearly broke him. I'm writing because I wanted you to know you're not alone. There are more of us than you might think. Women who've built real success while being dismissed or underestimated or deliberately hiding because the cost of being visible was too high. I wanted to say congratulations on your exit. It takes courage to stop hiding. If you ever want to talk to someone who's been through this, I'm happy to meet. Best, Rebecca." I stared at the email for a long time. I'd thought I was unique, but of course I wasn't. In a world that still underestimated women systematically, how many others had found the same solution? Build in the shadows, invest quietly, succeed without permission. I replied, "Rebecca, thank you for reaching out. I would very much like to meet. I'm learning there's a significant difference between being successful in secret and being successful in public. Any advice would be appreciated. Victoria." Her response came within minutes. "The biggest challenge is resisting the urge to explain or justify yourself. You don't owe anyone your story, your strategy, or your reasoning. The fact that you succeeded is enough, but be prepared. Everyone will want to categorize you, make you a symbol for something. Stay true to what actually matters to you. Coffee next week?" I accepted. By evening, the story had reached the mainstream news. All 3 networks mentioned it on their evening business segments. The framing varied. Some painted me as a hero, a woman taking back power from a dismissive husband. Others suggested something darker. questioning the ethics of hiding wealth from a spouse, speculating about what else I might have hidden. Marcus issued a statement through his publicist. I'm deeply concerned about my wife's mental health. Victoria has always had a vivid imagination. I love her and want to support her through this difficult time. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I felt pity. He still thought this was something he could spin, control, explain away. He didn't understand that the truth was about to become very public and very documented. Patricia called again at 7 p.m. We have a problem, she said. Marcus has hired Derek Hutchinson. Derek was Gerald Hutchinson's younger brother, one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in New York. He specialized in high-conflict cases and had a reputation for destroying opposing parties. Of course he did, I said. What's Derek's play? He's filing an emergency motion claiming you've hidden marital assets. He's asking the court to freeze everything until they can do a full accounting of your business activities. Can he do that? I asked, feeling a spike of genuine concern. He can ask, Patricia said. Whether a judge will grant it is another question. But Victoria, this is going to get ugly. Derek doesn't play nice. He's going to subpoena everything. Every email, every transaction, every business relationship. Your privacy is about to become a memory. I'd expected this, in theory, but the reality hit differently. Everything I'd built, every careful structure, every protected anonymity, about to be ripped open in divorce court. Let him come, I said with more confidence than I felt. Every asset is legitimately mine. Every investment was made with money I earned or inherited before the marriage. He has no legal claim to any of it. Legal claim and public relations are different things, Patricia warned. Derek's going to paint you as someone who deceived her husband for years. He'll make you look cold, calculating, manipulative. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Marcus's speech at dinner, his casual dismissal of my intelligence, his 15 years of treating me like an ornament. Yes, I said. I'm prepared for that. After the call, I stood at the window again, watching the city light up as darkness fell. Tomorrow, I'd have to face the press. Next week, I'd start sitting for depositions. My life was about to become public property, dissected and analyzed and judged. But I wasn't alone. Rebecca Morrison had reached out. Catherine Wells wanted to tell my story properly. Gerald Hutchinson had expressed genuine respect. Thomas Chen was eager to do business. Somewhere in this city, there were probably other women like me, watching this unfold, recognizing themselves in my story. And Marcus? Marcus was discovering that his biggest mistake wasn't marrying someone beneath his status. It was underestimating the woman beside him for so long that he never saw her rise above him. The doorman called up. Ms. Chen, there's a delivery. The messenger says it's urgent. Send it up, I said. A bike courier arrived moments later with an envelope marked confidential. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a note from Gerald Hutchinson. Victoria, it read. My brother Derek just called me. Very excited about taking your husband's case. I told him he's making a terrible mistake. You don't survive 40 years in business without learning to recognize genuine talent. Whatever you built legitimately. I know that because I've reviewed the returns of every ghost investment I could track. That kind of consistent success doesn't come from luck or deception. It comes from brilliance. Derek thinks he can bully you with legal tactics and public pressure. He's wrong. You've spent 15 years playing at a level most people can't imagine. You'll handle him just fine. Looking forward to our meeting next week. The note meant more than Hutchinson probably knew. Validation from someone who actually understood what I'd accomplished. Not just the dollar figures, but the skill required, the discipline, the vision. I texted Patricia. Tell Derek to bring his best game. I'm not intimidated. She replied immediately. That's my girl. Discovery is going to be fun. I spent the rest of the evening doing what I always did. Working. I reviewed quarterly reports from 3 portfolio companies. I analyzed a pitch deck from a promising AI startup. I made notes on market trends I was seeing in the semiconductor space. This was who I was, with or without Marcus, with or without the drama. I was someone who created value, identified opportunity, built things that lasted. The marriage had ended. The hiding was over. But the work continued. And honestly, that was exactly what I wanted. Around midnight, my phone buzzed one more time. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Marcus. Please call me. We need to talk about this reasonably." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I blocked the number and went to bed. There was nothing reasonable about 15 years of dismissal. Nothing to discuss about a marriage he'd destroyed with his own arrogance. Tomorrow, I'd start building the next phase of my life. Tonight, I'd sleep well for the first time in years, knowing I'd finally stopped pretending to be anyone but myself. The forensic accountants arrived at Patricia's office on Monday morning, looking like they'd dressed for a funeral. 3 of them, led by a woman named Margaret Chen, no relation, who specialized in complex asset investigations. Patricia had hired them preemptively. Better to have our own analysis ready before Derek Hutchinson's team started digging. I'd cleared my calendar for the week. This was going to take time. "We're going to need access to everything," Margaret said, spreading documentation across the conference table. Bank statements, investment accounts, corporate filings, property records, every financial transaction you've made since the marriage. "I have it all organized," I said, pulling up my laptop. 14 years of records, categorized by entity type, date, and transaction. Margaret's eyebrows rose. "This is going to be easier than I thought." We spent 6 hours going through my financial history. I walked them through every investment decision, explained the structure of my various holding companies, showed them the clear separation between my assets and anything marital. "You're thorough," Margaret said around hour 4. "Almost paranoid in your documentation." "I prefer careful," I replied. I always knew there was a possibility I'd need to prove these assets were mine. What I hadn't expected was the sheer scope of what I'd built. Seeing it laid out comprehensively, every investment, every company, every property, was staggering even to me. Margaret kept making notes and occasionally whistling under her breath. "You're more diversified than most pension funds," she said, "and your returns are exceptional. How did you develop this strategy?" "I studied everyone who'd ever succeeded at long-term wealth building," I said. "Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, Charlie Munger. But I also looked at what killed fortunes. Overconcentration, ego-driven decisions, lack of risk management. I built a system that eliminated as many failure modes as possible." "And you did this while Marcus thought you were shopping?" Margaret asked. "Essentially, yes." She shook her head. "I've been doing forensic accounting for 20 years. I've never seen anything quite like this." By late afternoon, Margaret had what she needed. "This is going to make Derek Hutchinson's day very unpleasant," she said. "There's no plausible argument for marital assets here. Everything is meticulously documented as separate property." She paused. "But Victoria, you should prepare for the personal attacks. When Derek realizes he can't win on the finances, he'll go after your character." "I'm ready," I said. After the accountants left, Patricia and I sat alone in her office. "You understand what's coming, right?" she said. "This is about to get vicious. Marcus's ego can't handle being wrong publicly. Derek will exploit that. He'll make this about betrayal, deception, cold calculation. They'll paint you as someone who married for access and connections, then secretly built wealth while manipulating your husband." "None of that is true," I said. "The timeline doesn't support it. I started investing before we married. Everything grew from there. Truth is a defense in court," Patricia said. "But public opinion doesn't require truth. You need to decide how you want to tell your story." Catherine Wells called that afternoon. I answered from Patricia's office, putting her on speaker. "Victoria," Catherine said, "I need to ask you something directly. Are you prepared for what's about to happen? The interview we do will be read by millions. It will define how people see you. Some will love you. Others will hate you. The scrutiny will be intense." "I'm prepared," I said. "Or at least, I'm willing to face it." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I've interviewed hundreds of powerful women. You know what I've learned? The ones who succeed in public are the ones who stop apologizing for being exceptional. Tell me about your childhood," Catherine continued. "I need to understand where this came from." "I grew up in Cleveland," I said. "My parents were immigrants from China. My father worked 3 jobs. My mother cleaned houses. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and every dollar mattered. I watched my parents work themselves to exhaustion for scraps. I learned early that intelligence without resources means nothing. Getting into Columbia was my ticket out. I thought meeting Marcus was the final validation. I was wrong." "Go on," Catherine encouraged. Marcus offered me access to a world I'd never imagined, I continued. But he also made it clear that I was there as decoration, not as an equal. So I started building my own path. Every investment was an act of rebellion against being diminished. Every success proved I was more than what he saw. And now, you've proven it publicly. What comes next? I don't know, I admitted. For 15 years I've been playing a game where the rules were hiding and protecting and building in secret. Now the rules have changed. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding. The interview would run in 2 weeks. Catherine wanted time to research, verify, build the full narrative. In the meantime, she'd give me media coaching. How to handle hostile questions, how to stay on message, how to not let Derek Hutchinson control the story. Tuesday morning brought the first salvo from Marcus's team. Derek had filed multiple motions, emergency orders to freeze my accounts, subpoenas for every bank I'd ever worked with, demands for depositions from my business partners. Most aggressive of all, a motion requesting that the court appoint a guardian to evaluate my mental competency. Patricia read through the filings with increasing disgust. "He's throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks," she said. "The mental competency motion is particularly offensive. It's based entirely on Marcus's testimony that your claims seem delusional. We'll fight all of it," she continued. "But Victoria, you need to stay visible and active. Go to your meetings, run your businesses. Show the court you're anything but incompetent." So I did. I took meetings with venture capital firms interested in co-investing opportunities. I sat on a video board call for one of my portfolio companies announcing major expansion. I reviewed financial projections and made investment decisions. And I did it all while knowing that Derek Hutchinson was probably having me followed, documenting my every move, looking for something to exploit. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Patricia's office. Gerald Hutchinson, looking uncomfortable and slightly guilty. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. "My brother Derek called me yesterday, very excited about destroying you in court. I told him he was an idiot." He smiled slightly. "That went over well, as you can imagine." "Why are you here?" I asked. "Because I've spent 40 years building relationships based on trust and competence," Gerald said. "Derek is about to burn through decades of my credibility by making our family look like we attack smart women who threaten male egos. More importantly, because what Marcus is doing to you is wrong. He had every opportunity to appreciate what he had. Instead, he's trying to destroy you for being better than him. I don't need protection," I said, "but I appreciate the sentiment." "I'm not offering protection," Gerald said. "I'm offering a business relationship. My firm would like to invest in your next fund, assuming you're planning to be more public going forward." I hadn't thought about next steps in concrete terms, but Gerald's question crystallized something. "You want to invest in a fund I haven't even announced yet?" $500 million, Gerald said, "on the basis of your track record, and the fact that anyone who could build what you built while staying completely hidden is someone I want to bet on." I looked at Patricia. She was grinning. "That's quite an endorsement," I said. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Gerald replied. "Though I would appreciate if you don't hold my idiot brother against me. We all have embarrassing relatives." The meeting with Gerald ran 3 hours. We discussed investment strategies, risk management, portfolio construction. He asked detailed questions about my process, my team, my vision for scaling. By the end, we had the outline of a partnership that would make me one of the most prominent venture investors in the country. After Gerald left, Patricia poured us both whiskey. "You're about to become very public very fast," she said. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I thought about 15 years of hiding, 15 years of pretending to be less than I was, 15 years of watching Marcus take credit while dismissing my capabilities. "I'm ready," I said. Marcus forced me out of the shadows. "Fine. Let's see what I can build in the light." That evening, Derek Hutchinson's team leaked their first story. Page 6 ran it with a salacious headline, "Secret Fortune or Shared Assets. Ashford Divorce Heats Up." The story painted me as someone who'd hidden wealth from my husband, possibly using marital connections to build businesses, definitely owing Marcus a share of everything I'd earned. It was exactly the narrative Patricia had predicted. I called Catherine Wells. "Let's move up the timeline on the interview," I said. "Derek Hutchinson is controlling the narrative. I need to tell my side." We scheduled it for Saturday, 4 days away. In the meantime, I had to survive Marcus's deposition. They'd subpoenaed me for Friday morning. 10 hours of Derek Hutchinson trying to break me down, find inconsistencies, build his case that I'd deceived and stolen from Marcus. Patricia prepped me Wednesday and Thursday. Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. Stay calm. Remember, Derek wants you to lose control. Show emotion. Give him something to use. I can handle Derek Hutchinson, I said. I've been managing Marcus's ego for 15 years. Derek is just a more expensive version of the same insecurity. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. The deposition was in Derek's office, a chrome and glass monstrosity in Midtown that screamed expensive bad taste. Marcus was there, sitting next to Derek, looking haggard. He'd lost weight. His suit hung loose. I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction exactly. Just sadness for time wasted, potential unfulfilled, a marriage that had been doomed from the start, because Marcus could never accept a partner who challenged him. Derek started with the basics. My name, address, occupation. Then he went for the throat. Mrs. Ashford, when did you decide to deceive your husband about your business activities? I never deceived him, I replied calmly. I simply didn't discuss my investments with him. Isn't hiding hundreds of millions of dollars from your spouse deception? Derek pressed. I didn't hide anything. I built assets separate from the marriage using my own resources. Marcus never asked about my activities. His assumption that I was doing nothing is not my responsibility. Derek spent 3 hours trying different angles, questioning my business judgment, suggesting I'd used Marcus's connections, implying I'd married him for access to wealthy investors. I answered each question with documentation. Email trails showing I'd built relationships independently, records proving every investment dollar came from my premarital funds or returns on those funds. Testimony from business partners confirming they'd worked with me without ever mentioning Marcus. Around hour 6, Derek switched tactics. He pulled out printed copies of my social media posts from the last decade. Photographs of charity events, fundraisers, society galas, all showing me as the supportive wife. Didn't you present yourself as Mrs. Marcus Ashford at all these events? He asked. Yes, I said. Because I was Mrs. Marcus Ashford. I was also Victoria Chen, investor. Both identities were real. But you never corrected people who assumed you were just Marcus's wife? Why would I? Their assumptions weren't my problem. If they underestimated me, that was their mistake, not my deception. Derek was getting frustrated. I could see it in his jaw, the way he shuffled papers more aggressively. Patricia sat beside me, occasionally objecting to form, but mostly letting me handle it. Around hour 8, Derek made his final play. Isn't it true, Mrs. Ashford, that you married Marcus Ashford specifically to gain access to wealthy investors? That your entire relationship was a calculated deception designed to build your business? I looked at Marcus then. Really looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. No, I said quietly. I married Marcus because I loved him. Because I thought he was different from other wealthy men I'd met. Because when we first met, he seemed genuinely interested in who I was, not just what I looked like. I was wrong about that, but my intentions were genuine. Then why hide your business success? Derek pushed. Because, I said, meeting Marcus's eyes now, forcing him to look at me. The first time I mentioned an investment idea to Marcus, he patted my head and told me to leave business to the grown-ups. The third time I tried to discuss my work, he suggested I see a therapist about my need to prove myself. By year 5, I'd learned that my husband loved the idea of me more than the reality, so I gave him the idea and built the reality elsewhere. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd expected anger or defensiveness. Instead, I'd given him sadness and truth. The deposition ended shortly after. I was exhausted but intact. Patricia and I left through a side exit, avoiding the reporters camped in the lobby. You were perfect, she said in the car. Derek thought he could rattle you. Instead, you destroyed his entire narrative. Now comes the hard part, I said. Tomorrow I talk to Catherine Wells, and the story becomes public on my terms, not Derek's. Are you ready? Patricia asked. Honestly, I don't know, I admitted. But ready or not, it's time to stop hiding. The Forbes interview happened in my Tribeca apartment. Catherine Wells arrived at 9 a.m. Saturday with a photographer, a fact-checker, and a voice recorder that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. Tell me everything, Catherine said once we'd settled in my living room. Start from the beginning, and don't skip the uncomfortable parts. Those are usually where the real story lives. So I told her. Growing up in Cleveland, watching my parents work themselves to exhaustion for almost nothing, getting into Columbia on scholarship, meeting Marcus at the charity auction, the slow realization that my husband saw me as decorative, not substantial, the first investment I made with my own money, the thrill of succeeding, the careful construction of shell companies and offshore accounts, the growth of my portfolio, the double life of society wife and secret investor. Catherine took notes but rarely interrupted. The photographer captured images of me at my trading desk, by the windows overlooking the city, holding documents that showed the scope of my business empire. After 3 hours, Catherine put down her pen. You built a fortune while your husband thought you were shopping. That's the headline everyone will want. But that's not the real story, is it? No, I said. The real story is about the cost of being underestimated and the freedom of finally being seen. What's next for you? Catherine asked. After the divorce, after this interview, after you've proven your point. What does Victoria Ashford want? Victoria Chen, I corrected. I'm going back to my maiden name. And what I want is to build something bigger than hiding. I want to invest in women founders who are being underestimated. I want to prove that the best returns come from backing talent that others overlook. The interview would run in Forbes the following Monday. Catherine promised it would be comprehensive, fair, and would include responses from Marcus's team. She'd also secured interviews with several of my business partners who confirmed my abilities and independence. I spent the rest of the weekend preparing for the fallout. I knew Marcus would respond. I knew Derek Hutchinson would spin it somehow. I knew the internet would explode with opinions about whether I was a hero or a villain. Sunday night, I got a call from Rebecca Morrison, the other ghost who'd reached out earlier. I read the advance copy of Catherine's article, she said. Forbes sent it to me for comment, hoping I'd provide context about other women in similar situations. What did you tell them? I asked. That you're brave, Rebecca said. That coming forward destroys the careful privacy that made success possible. That you're going to face backlash I never had to deal with because I stayed quiet after my divorce, but also that you're going to inspire more women than you can imagine. We talked for 2 hours. Rebecca described her own journey, the investments she'd hidden, the marriage that had collapsed when her success became undeniable. She'd rebuilt her life afterward, but never stepped fully into the public eye. You have a chance to do something I didn't, she said. You can change the conversation about women and wealth. You can show that secret success isn't the only path. Are you ready for that? I don't know, I admitted, but it's happening whether I'm ready or not. The Forbes article dropped online at 6 a.m. Monday. The headline was perfect. The Ghost Steps into the Light. How Victoria Chen built a $700 million fortune while being dismissed as a society wife. By 7 a.m., it had been shared 10,000 times. By 9 a.m., I was trending on Twitter. By noon, every major news outlet was running the story. The reactions were predictable and polarized. Women's groups praised me as an icon of hidden female excellence. Business magazines analyzed my investment strategy. Conservative commentators questioned the ethics of hiding wealth from a spouse. Marriage counselors debated relationship honesty versus self-protection. And Marcus issued a statement. I'm devastated to learn about this betrayal. Victoria and I had what I thought was an honest marriage. I never imagined my wife was living a secret life. I hope the court will recognize the emotional manipulation and deception involved. Derek Hutchinson gave an interview to CNBC, painting me as cold and calculating, someone who'd used the marriage as cover while building a hidden empire. He suggested I owed Marcus half of everything. Patricia responded with facts. Victoria Chen's premarital assets and separate property are thoroughly documented. Mr. Ashford has no legal claim to wealth his wife built independently. His characterization of her as manipulative is merely an attempt to justify his own failure to value his spouse's talents. By Wednesday, the narrative had shifted. Business leaders started defending me publicly. Thomas Chen tweeted, "Knowing Victoria Chen's actual capabilities makes Marcus Ashford's dismissal of her even more absurd. This isn't about deception. It's about a brilliant woman protecting herself from a man who couldn't handle her success." Gerald Hutchinson published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. The real scandal isn't that Victoria Chen built a fortune in private. It's that talented women still feel they must hide their abilities to maintain relationships with insecure men. Thursday brought a development I hadn't anticipated. 3 different women reached out to Patricia's office. All were in similar situations, married to successful men, building their own businesses or investments in secret, worried about what would happen when the truth emerged. Patricia referred them to attorneys she trusted, but I did something else. I called each of them personally. We compared notes, shared strategies, discussed the costs of hiding and the risks of being visible. One was a doctor married to a lawyer who dismissed her medical expertise. She'd been investing her salary for 10 years and had built a substantial portfolio, while her husband assumed she was spending money on clothes and vacations. Another was a tech executive, whose finance husband couldn't accept that she earned twice his salary. She'd been hiding bonuses and stock options, building a separate net worth while maintaining the fiction that they were equals. The third was a woman who'd inherited money from her grandmother and invested it brilliantly while her husband believed his real estate career was funding their lifestyle. All of them were terrified of what would happen if they stopped hiding. I can't promise it will be easy, I told each of them. The scrutiny is intense, but I can promise that being seen for who you really are is worth the cost of losing someone who only loved who they thought you were. By the end of the week, something unexpected happened. My assistant Jennifer reported that we'd received 43 investment pitches from women-led startups, all explicitly requesting backing from Victoria Chen because they'd read the Forbes article. They want to be funded by someone who understands being underestimated, Jennifer said. I started reviewing the pitches. A biotech company developing better maternal health screening, led by a doctor who'd spent years being dismissed by male colleagues. An edtech platform created by teachers tired of being told they didn't understand business. A fintech startup solving problems with women's access to capital. Each pitch represented not just a business opportunity, but a chance to back women who'd been in situations similar to mine. By the following Monday, 2 weeks after the dinner at Per Se that had blown up my marriage and my privacy, I made a decision. I called a press conference. Patricia tried to talk me out of it. You don't need to do this. Let the story settle. Focus on the divorce. No, I said. This is bigger than the divorce now. I need to show these women that there's a path forward. The press conference took place at a hotel in Midtown. 50 reporters showed up, cameras and recorders ready. I wore a simple black suit and stood at a podium. No notes. Just the truth I'd been living for 15 years. My name is Victoria Chen, I began. For 15 years, I was also known as Victoria Ashford, wife of Marcus Ashford, and for most of that time, I was the ghost, an anonymous investor who built a portfolio now worth over $700 million. I'm here today to announce 3 things. First, I'm launching a new venture capital fund focused exclusively on women-led companies in tech, healthcare, and financial services. The fund will start with $500 million in committed capital. I paused, making eye contact with several reporters. Second, I'm committing $50 million to create an organization supporting women who are building businesses or careers while facing dismissal or opposition from their partners. No woman should have to choose between her marriage and her ambitions. Finally, I'm asking other women who've been hiding their success to consider stepping into the light. Not because hiding is wrong, but because the world needs to see female competence, needs to understand that we've been succeeding all along, just doing it quietly to protect ourselves and our relationships. The questions came fast. Was I encouraging women to deceive their husbands? No, I said. I'm encouraging women to protect themselves and build their own security. If honest communication about success destroys a relationship, that relationship was already broken. Did I regret hiding for so long? No. I did what I needed to do to survive and thrive in a marriage where my capabilities were dismissed. The only thing I regret is not leaving sooner. What would I say to Marcus? I looked directly at the camera. I'd say thank you. Thank you for underestimating me so completely that I had no choice but to become extraordinary. The press conference video went viral. Within 24 hours, it had 30 million views. Within a week, I'd received commitments for another $200 million for the new fund from investors who wanted to back women founders. And Marcus? He withdrew his court filings. Derek Hutchinson issued a terse statement that they'd reached a settlement. Marcus would keep Ashford Properties. I would keep everything I'd built. Neither of us would pay the other anything. It was over. Patricia called me that evening. You won, she said. More importantly, you changed the conversation. Women all over the country are talking about hidden success, about protecting themselves financially, about not shrinking to fit into relationships. I didn't win, I said. I just stopped losing. There's a difference. The months that followed were a blur of activity. I invested in 12 companies from those 43 pitches. I hired a team to run the women's support organization. I moved permanently into the Tribeca apartment and converted the Upper East Side mansion into a foundation headquarters. I did interviews, gave talks, became the face of something I'd never sought, hidden female excellence finally becoming visible. Marcus faded from view. Ashford Properties struggled without the anonymous financial support I'd provided. He ended up selling the company to a larger firm and took a position as a regional director. The last I heard, he'd moved to Boston, away from New York and the constant reminders of his miscalculation. I don't think about him much anymore. On the 1-year anniversary of that dinner at Per Se, Forbes ran a follow-up article, Victoria Chen's New Visible Empire. They documented the fund's returns, which were exceptional. They interviewed founders I'd backed, women who were building billion-dollar companies because someone had finally believed in them. And they asked me the question everyone wanted answered. Was it worth it? Losing your privacy? Becoming a symbol? Having every decision scrutinized? I thought about the question carefully. Yes, I said, because for 15 years, I was free to succeed but imprisoned by secrecy. Now I'm free to succeed and free to be seen. That's worth everything I lost and more. The article included one last detail. Marcus Ashford had reached out requesting a meeting. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make amends. I declined. Some chapters close completely. Some doors don't need to be reopened. Marcus had his chance to know me, to value me, to build something real together. Instead, he'd chosen his ego, his status, his need to feel superior. I'd moved on to building something bigger than he could imagine. The woman who'd spent 15 years hiding was gone. The woman who emerged from that dinner, forced into visibility by her husband's arrogance, was still figuring out who she wanted to be, but she was visible, she was powerful, and she was done pretending to be anything less than extraordinary. Marcus had been right about one thing, though not in the way he meant. I'd never reach his status, because I'd built something better, something earned through skill instead of inherited through birth, something that helped others instead of just feeding ego. I'd reached a place Marcus never would. I'd become myself, fully and unapologetically. And that, I realized as I looked out over Manhattan from my Tribeca windows, was exactly what I'd been building toward all along. Not wealth for its own sake, not revenge against Marcus, not even proving a point. Just the freedom to be completely, visibly, extraordinarily myself. The ghost had stepped into the light, and she wasn't going back into the shadows. Ever again. 2 years after the divorce, I stood in a very different kind of room. Not the marble halls of society events, or the glass towers of corporate Manhattan, but a crowded community center in Brooklyn, hosting the first annual Women's Wealth Summit. 500 women filled the space. Some were entrepreneurs I'd funded. Others were investors who'd joined my fund. Many were simply women who'd read the Forbes article and recognized themselves in my story. I was scheduled to give the keynote speech, but I wasn't nervous. These were my people, women who understood that success often required hiding before it could survive in the open. The organizer, a brilliant entrepreneur named Sarah, whose biotech company I'd funded, introduced me with words that still felt surreal. Please welcome the woman who changed how we think about hidden excellence, founder of the Chen Ventures Fund and the Visible Women Initiative, Victoria Chen. The applause was overwhelming. I took the stage and looked out at 500 faces, seeing my younger self reflected in so many of them. 2 years ago, I stood in a Manhattan restaurant and had my marriage implode because I'd committed the unforgivable sin of being more successful than my husband expected. That night felt like an ending, but I was wrong. It was actually a beginning. I told them the full story, not the sanitized version from interviews, but the raw truth, the loneliness of hiding, the fear of discovery, the complicated feelings about building an empire while pretending to be decorative, the liberation and terror of finally being seen. But here's what I've learned since then, I continued. Hiding protected me, but visibility empowered me. Hiding let me succeed individually, but visibility lets me help others succeed. Hiding felt necessary in a marriage that couldn't handle my truth, but visibility created a community of women who celebrate each other's truths. I shared specific lessons: how to protect your assets legally and ethically, how to build wealth without permission or apology, how to know when hiding is survival and when it's self-betrayal, how to leave relationships that require you to be small. But mostly, I talked about what came after the hiding. The 2 years since I'd stopped pretending had been the most productive and meaningful of my life. The fund had invested in 37 companies. 18 were led by women who'd previously been told their ideas weren't fundable. 6 had already achieved unicorn status, billion-dollar valuations. The returns were exceptional, not because we were getting special treatment, but because we were backing exceptional talent others had overlooked. The Visible Women Initiative had provided legal support, financial planning, and counseling to over 1,500 women navigating similar situations. Some had chosen to stay married and establish clearer boundaries. Others had left relationships that couldn't adapt. All had found community with others who understood. And the best part? Other investors had noticed. Watching our returns, they'd started funding more women founders. Not out of charity, but because we'd proven that backing underestimated talent was extraordinarily profitable. After my speech, the Q&A session ran 2 hours. Women asked about everything: investment strategies, divorce tactics, dealing with guilt about hiding, managing public scrutiny, protecting children from fallout, rebuilding after leaving. One question stood out. A young woman in her 20s stood up. "I'm not married yet. I'm just starting my career. But my boyfriend already makes comments about how I shouldn't be so aggressive at work, how success isn't feminine. Should I leave now, or try to hide like you did?" The room went silent, waiting for my answer. "Don't hide," I said firmly. "I hid because I was already married, already invested, already trying to make something work. You have a different choice. You can build your success openly from the start. And if your boyfriend can't handle that, he's shown you exactly who he is. Believe him." The applause was deafening. After the summit, Sarah and I had dinner at a small restaurant in Park Slope. She'd come a long way from the nervous founder who'd pitched me 2 years ago. Her company was now valued at $2 billion, developing revolutionary maternal health technology. "You've built something important," Sarah said. "Not just the fund, but the permission structure. Women are succeeding openly because you showed them it's possible." "It's not just me," I said. "It's all of us. Every woman who stops hiding, every success that becomes visible, makes it easier for the next one." Sarah smiled. "Have you heard from Marcus at all?" "Not directly," I said. "Though I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's engaged again. Another younger woman. Very decorative, apparently. I hope he's learned something, but I doubt it." "Do you ever regret how it ended?" Sarah asked. "The public spectacle? The scrutiny? Honestly, no. It needed to be public. A quiet divorce would have let Marcus save face, maintain his narrative. This way, the truth came out. And that truth helped other women." "How's the dating situation?" Sarah asked with a grin. "I'm still not sure how dating works when you're publicly known for having more money than most Fortune 500 CEOs. It's complicated," I admitted. I'd been on a few dates. Men who claimed they didn't care about the wealth disparity but clearly did. Men who were attracted to the power but intimidated by the reality. One man who'd seemed perfect until he suggested I should let him manage my portfolio because men understand finance better. I'd ended that date before appetizers arrived. "But I'm not looking for another Marcus," I continued. "I'm not looking for someone to complete me or validate me. If I meet someone who can be a genuine partner, great. If not, I'm complete on my own." "That's growth," Sarah said. 2 years ago, you were still defining yourself in relation to Marcus's failure. Now you're just yourself." The next day, I had a meeting that had been months in the making. The White House had invited me to join a presidential commission on women's economic empowerment. It was an honor I'd never sought, but couldn't refuse. The work mattered too much. I flew to Washington, sat in rooms where policy was made, and advocated for changes that would make it easier for women to build wealth, protect their assets, and succeed without having to hide. The woman who'd spent 15 years invisible was now helping shape national policy. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening, walking through Georgetown after dinner meetings, I called my parents in Cleveland. They were still processing everything that had happened, still slightly overwhelmed by their daughter's transformation from society wife to business icon. Mom answered on the second ring, Xiao Wei, she said, using my childhood name. We saw you on the news today. White House meetings. Very impressive. I smiled, hearing the pride in her voice. Dad and I were talking, she continued. We remember when you were little, always reading, always studying. You used to tell us you wanted to be important. We thought you meant marry someone important. Turns out you meant be someone important. I felt tears forming. I got there because of you and Dad. You showed me what real work looks like, what sacrifice can build. I just applied those lessons differently. Your father wants to talk, Mom said. A moment later, Dad's voice came through, gruff and emotional. My daughter, he said. I'm proud. Those were the only words I needed. 3 years after that dinner at Per Se, the fund crossed a significant milestone. Our portfolio company's combined valuation exceeded $20 billion. We'd created 17,000 jobs, most of them going to women and minorities in tech and healthcare. The returns to our limited partners were exceptional, proving once and for all that backing underestimated talent wasn't just socially valuable, it was financially smart. I'd also started something new. A mentorship program matching successful women investors with young women just starting their careers. Not hiding. Building openly from the beginning, armed with knowledge about protecting themselves and choosing partners who could handle their success. One of my mentees was a brilliant 23-year-old named Amanda, who reminded me of myself at that age. Smart, ambitious, but dating a guy who made subtle digs about her career goals. I'd invited her to lunch to discuss a concerning email she'd sent. He says he loves me, Amanda said over salads neither of us was really eating. But he also says things like, you're too focused on work, or successful men don't want women who compete with them. What did you do when Marcus said things like that? I listened for 15 years, I said honestly. I hid my success to protect his ego. And it cost me 15 years of being fully myself. Amanda, here's what I wish someone had told me at 23. The right partner celebrates your success, not feels threatened by it. If someone needs you to be smaller so they can feel bigger, they're not your partner. They're your obstacle. She nodded slowly. But what if he's right? What if success makes me less lovable? I leaned forward. Success doesn't make you less lovable. It makes you more yourself. And if someone can't love the real you, they don't actually love you. They love their idea of you. Amanda broke up with her boyfriend the following week. 6 months later, she'd started her own company and raised seed funding from 3 different investors, including my fund. 2 years after that conversation, her company would be worth $50 million. But more importantly, she'd learned early what took me decades, that shrinking yourself for someone else's comfort is a betrayal of your own potential. 5 years after the divorce, Forbes ran another feature. This time, not just about me, but about the entire ecosystem that had emerged from that viral moment. The Visible Women Effect, how Victoria Chen's story changed venture capital. The article documented the changes. More women raising funds. More women-led companies getting serious investment. More conversations about hidden success and the systemic reasons talented women had learned to hide. And it tracked the women who'd reached out to me after the original story. The doctor who'd been hiding her investments had divorced her dismissive husband and started a medical device company now worth hundreds of millions. The tech executive had left her insecure partner and become CEO of a major startup. The woman who'd hidden her inheritance had started her own investment firm. We weren't outliers, the Forbes article concluded. We were the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. How many brilliant women were still hiding their capabilities? How many marriages were built on the foundation of female diminishment? How many empires were being built in secret, because visibility felt too dangerous? The article ended with a quote from me. Success shouldn't require hiding. Partnership shouldn't require shrinkage. Love shouldn't demand that we pretend to be less than we are. If my story helps even one woman choose visibility over hiding, authenticity over performance, then the cost of my own visibility was worth it. That evening, I stood in my Tribeca apartment, the same windows overlooking the same city, but everything had changed. I wasn't the same woman who'd stood here 5 years ago after walking out of that restaurant. I was wealthier, yes. The fund had made me one of the 50 richest self-made women in America. But more than that, I was freer. Free to succeed openly. Free to help others. Free to be completely myself without apology or disguise. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Victoria Chen? A familiar voice asked. It's Marcus. I hadn't heard his voice in 5 years. The sound of it brought back no feelings whatsoever, neither anger nor nostalgia, just recognition that someone I used to know was calling. What do you want, Marcus? I asked. I wanted to congratulate you, he said. I've been following what you've built. The fund, the initiative, all of it. It's impressive. Is that all? I asked. No, he said quietly. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For not seeing you. For not valuing you. For that speech at dinner. For all of it. I was silent, letting him continue. I was engaged, Marcus went on. Until last month. My fiancé left me. Said I was still trying to find someone to make me feel important instead of actually being important. She'd read your Forbes article. She said she wouldn't let me do to her what I did to you. I'm sorry that happened, I said, and meant it. Not sorry for Marcus particularly, but sorry for anyone learning painful lessons about themselves. But I'm not sure why you're telling me, because I finally understand, he said. You were never trying to compete with me. You were just being yourself, and I couldn't handle that someone I thought should support me actually didn't need me at all. I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, Marcus, I did need you, just not in the way you thought. I needed a partner who could celebrate my success instead of feeling threatened by it. I needed someone strong enough to let me be strong. You weren't that person. I know, he said. I'm working on becoming that person now. Therapy, honest self-examination, all of it. Too late for us, but maybe not too late for me to be better. I hope that's true, I said. I really do. We said goodbye after that. It was the closure neither of us had gotten 5 years ago. Not angry or bitter, just two people acknowledging a shared past and wishing each other well. After hanging up, I stood at the window for a long time, thinking about the journey, from hiding to visibility, from diminishment to empowerment, from being Marcus Ashford's decorative wife to being Victoria Chen, investor, mentor, advocate, myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emergency board meeting just approved the new maternal health clinic network. We're going to save thousands of lives. Couldn't have done it without your initial investment. This is what success looks like. Another message came through. This one from Amanda, my mentee. Just closed our Series B, $45 million. They took us seriously because you showed them women-led companies could succeed. Thank you for being visible so I didn't have to hide. And finally, a message from my mother. Your father and I just donated to your scholarship fund. It's only $20,000, but it's everything we saved. We want other girls to have chances like you had. I sat down, overwhelmed by the beautiful reality I was living. This wasn't the life I'd imagined when I married Marcus. It was bigger, more meaningful, more authentically mine. Marcus had said I'd never reach his status, and he'd been absolutely right. I'd gone somewhere he couldn't follow, somewhere he'd never understand. I'd built an empire not on inherited wealth or family name, but on skill, vision, and the courage to be visible even when hiding felt safer. I thought about all the women I'd helped, all the companies we'd funded, all the jobs created, all the lives changed. That was my legacy, not the dollar figures or the Forbes rankings, but the proof that visibility mattered, that speaking truth to diminishment had power, that refusing to hide could change entire industries. 7 years after that dinner at Per Se, I gave a TED Talk that would be viewed 30 million times. The title was simple, The Cost of Hiding and the Freedom of Being Seen. I told the whole story one more time, but I ended with something new. For 15 years, I asked the wrong question. I asked, how can I succeed despite being dismissed? The right question was, why am I in a relationship where my success must be hidden? If you're brilliant, be brilliantly visible. If you're capable, be capably visible. If you're successful, be successfully visible. And if someone in your life needs you to hide those things, they don't love you. They love the smaller version of you that makes them comfortable. You deserve to be loved at your full size. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes, but the real impact came later, in the thousands of messages I received from women saying they'd stopped hiding, left limiting relationships, started businesses openly, demanded to be seen. That night, walking back to my apartment through the city I'd lived in for decades but finally felt like mine, I thought about Marcus's words one last time. You'll never reach my status. He'd meant it as an insult, a ceiling, a limit on my potential. Instead, it became a prophecy. I didn't reach his status because I exceeded it. I built something bigger than inherited wealth, bigger than ego, bigger than any one person's success. I built a movement, a fund, a community, a new way of thinking about women and wealth and visibility. And I did it all by refusing to accept that being underestimated meant being limited. Marcus gave me the perfect gift that night, though he didn't realize it. He freed me from the last chain holding me back, the need for his approval, his respect, his acknowledgement. In trying to put me in my place, he showed me I'd already outgrown it. I never reached his status. I created my own, and that made all the difference.